The scent of burnt espresso and eucalyptus candles always filled their two-bedroom apartment, a space Elara had carefully curated to feel like a sanctuary, even though she could have easily bought the entire building with a single phone call. She stood at the mirror, smoothing the lapels of Julian's charcoal suit. "You're going to be brilliant tonight," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine pride. Julian didn't look at her. He was too busy admiring his own reflection. He adjusted his silk tie, a gift from Elara that she'd claimed was a vintage find, but was actually a hand-stitched piece from a Parisian atelier. "Entrepreneur of the Year, Elara, can you believe it? 3 years ago I was coding in a garage. Now Thorn Tech is the name on everyone's lips." "Our garage," Elara corrected gently, a playful smile dancing on her lips. She thought of the nights she'd spent redrafting his business models, the consulting she'd done for him that was actually high-level architectural and financial strategy. Julian finally turned, patting her cheek with a condescending fondness. "Right, thanks for the coffee and the moral support, babe. You look nice, very sensible." Sensible? Elara looked at her modest navy wrap dress. To Julian, she was a freelance consultant with a steady, boring income. He had no idea that the modest dress was a strategic choice to hide the fact that she was the heir to the Vance global empire. She wanted him to love the girl, not the ledger. The grand ballroom of the plaza was a sea of shimmering sequins and predatory smiles. As Julian's name was called, the applause was deafening. Elara stood in the back, her heart swelling as he took the stage. But as he began his speech, the warmth in her chest began to chill. "I didn't get here by playing it safe," Julian declared into the microphone, his eyes scanning the front rows, ignoring the back where Elara stood. "I got here by surrounding myself with people who have vision, people who belong at the top." His gaze locked onto Sienna Montgomery, a woman draped in diamonds and a dress that cost more than Julian's first 3 servers. Sienna smirked, raising her champagne flute. After the speech, Elara tried to reach him, but a wall of photographers and socialites blocked her path. She saw Julian leaned in close to Sienna, his hand resting on the small of her back, a gesture he usually reserved for Elara when she was feeling vulnerable. "She's the Montgomery heiress," a voice whispered beside her. Elara turned to see Marcus, her childhood friend and the CFO of her family's firm. He looked sharp, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Julian's been networking with her for weeks, Elara. You need to stop this charade." "He's just ambitious, Marcus," Elara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "There's a difference between ambition and climbing over people to get to a higher balcony," Marcus replied. The ride home was silent. When they entered the apartment, the eucalyptus scent felt suffocating. Julian didn't take off his jacket. He went straight to the sideboard and poured a drink. "We need to talk," he said, his back to her. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I thought tonight was a celebration." "For the company, yes. For us, it's over." Julian turned, his expression cold and clinical. "I've outgrown you, Elara. You're a great girl, really. You're stable. You're safe. But I'm moving into a different world now. I need a partner who can open doors for me, not someone I have to carry through them." Elara felt as if the floor had turned to water. "Carry me? Julian, I've been the one holding the door open for 3 years. Who do you think restructured your debt? Who do you think wrote the proposal that got you the Vance Global investment?" Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Vance Global invested because they saw my genius. You just proofread the documents. Sienna can put me in rooms with governors. You're a freelance consultant who shops at sales." He pulled a suitcase from the closet. It was already packed. "I'm moving into the Montgomery estate tonight. Keep the apartment. Consider it a severance package for your time." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty room. Elara stood paralyzed for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and watched his car pull away. She pulled her phone from her purse and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Marcus?" she said, her voice steadying as the heartbreak began to crystallize into a cold, hard diamond of resolution. "The audit of Thorn Tech started tonight. And call my stylist. I think it's time the chairwoman of Vance Global made a public appearance." The two-bedroom apartment felt like a tomb. For 3 years, Elara had carefully curated its warmth, but now the eucalyptus scent made her stomach churn. She didn't pack much. She left the sensible navy dresses and the sensible flats. She left the memory of the woman who shrunk herself to make a man feel tall. When the black town car pulled up to the curb at 4 a.m., the driver didn't ask questions. He simply took her single designer suitcase, the one she'd kept hidden in the back of the closet, and opened the door. As they crossed the gates of the Vance estate, the rising sun hit the limestone facade, turning the ivy-covered walls into a fortress of gold. Elara stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking against the white marble. "Welcome home, Miss Vance," the housekeeper said softly, handing her a crystal glass of chilled water. Elara didn't go to sleep. She went to the West Wing, to an office that had sat dormant for 3 years. She sat behind the mahogany desk, opened her laptop, and watched the dawn break over the manicured gardens. "You look like you haven't slept," a voice said from the doorway. Marcus stood there, holding 2 folders and a dangerously large coffee. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, he didn't see the consultant, he saw the chairwoman. "I've spent 3 years sleeping, Marcus," Elara said, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel. "I'm wide awake now. Give me the Thorn Tech file." Marcus slid the folder across the desk. "It's worse than we thought. Julian is a brilliant frontman, but he's a terrible steward. Since he started networking with Sienna Montgomery, he's been burning through his Series B funding to maintain an image. He bought a private jet lease he can't afford. He's diverted R&D funds into PR. He's bleeding, Elara." Elara flipped through the spreadsheets. She saw the cracks she had previously filled with her own silent labor. Without her correcting his projections and smoothing over his logistics, the company was a house of cards in a high wind. "He reached out to the Vance Global investment arm yesterday. He doesn't know it's us. He thinks he's applying to a faceless board of directors. He's begging for a bridge loan to keep Thorntech afloat through the quarter." Elara traced the signature on the loan application. Julian's handwriting was arrogant, all sharp peaks and long, sweeping lines. "Grant him the meeting," Elara said. Marcus blinked. "You want to give him the money?" "No, I want to audit him." She looked up, her eyes cold and clear. "Standard procedure for a high-risk investment. I want full access to his books, his server logs, and his employee contracts. Tell him the family principal will be reviewing the documents personally, but she prefers to remain anonymous for now." The next 2 weeks were a blur of transformation. Elara traded her sensible wrap dresses for bespoke tailoring, sharp-shouldered blazers in charcoal and ivory, silk blouses that felt like a second skin. She spent her days in the Vance Global boardroom, reclaiming the authority she had let slide. She was no longer the lucky girl Julian had carried. She was the woman whose signature moved markets. Then the first report from the audit arrived. "He's been doing more than just overspending," Marcus said, dropping a thick stack of papers on her desk. "He's been filing patents for technology that, well, Elara, it looks familiar." Elara scanned the schematics. Her blood ran cold. These weren't just Julian's ideas. They were the designs she had sketched on the back of napkins during late-night dinners. They were the architectural frameworks she had built for him while he slept. He hadn't just left her, he had stolen the very soul of her intellectual work and claimed it as his own to impress the Montgomerys. "He thinks I'm a ghost," Elara whispered, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her lips. "He thinks he can use my mind to buy his way into Sienna's world." "What's the move?" Marcus asked, his eyes glinting with anticipation. The Montgomerys are throwing a masquerade engagement gala this weekend. Julian thinks he's finally arrived at the top. He thinks he's finally found the person who can open doors for him. She turned back to Marcus. Send a bouquet of white lilies to the Montgomery estate. Attach my card, not the consultant card, the one with the Vance Global crest. Tell them I'll be attending as the guest of honor. He'll have a heart attack when he sees you, Marcus noted. No, he'll think I'm a stalker. He'll think I'm pathetic, right up until the moment he realizes I'm the one holding his entire future in my hands. The Montgomery estate was a sprawling, neoclassical nightmare of white marble and excessive topiary. For the masquerade gala, the gardens had been transformed into a labyrinth of fairy lights and silk-draped gazebos. Every guest wore a mask, a sea of velvet and feathers designed to hide identities, yet Elara felt more seen than she ever had in her life. She stepped out of the limousine, her dress a liquid gold silk that clung to her frame like a second skin, shimmering under the spotlights. Her mask was a delicate, laser-cut piece of black titanium, sharp and elegant. Beside her, Marcus looked lethal in a tailored tuxedo, his own mask a simple matte black. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "I've been ready for 3 years, Marcus. I just didn't know it," Elara replied. Her voice didn't shake. The nerves had been burned away by the audit reports she'd read that afternoon, reports that proved Julian had been funneling company money into a secret offshore account to pay for Sienna's engagement ring. The ballroom was a humid hive of high society gossip. As they entered, a hush rippled through the nearest clusters of guests. The reclusive Vance heir was a myth in these circles, a ghost story told at board meetings. Elara spotted them near the champagne fountain. Julian was wearing a silver mask that matched Sienna's sequined gown. He was laughing, his head tilted back in that practiced, arrogant way Elara used to find charming. Now he looked like a caricature of a man. They began to circulate. Elara watched Julian from the corner of her eye. He was playing the part of the visionary, holding court with several tech investors. "And that's when I told the Vance board," Julian's voice carried over the music, dripping with bravado, "that if they wanted a piece of the future, they had to move at my speed. They're lucky I'm even considering their bridge loan." Marcus stiffened beside her. "The audacity is almost impressive," he muttered. "Let him have his moment," Elara said softly. "The higher he climbs, the better the view when he falls." Eventually, their paths collided. Julian was reaching for a fresh glass of Moet when he caught sight of Elara. He froze, his hand hovering in mid-air. Even through the mask, she could see his eyes narrow in confusion, then widen in recognition. He excused himself from a stunned Sienna and marched toward Elara, grabbing her elbow and pulling her to a shadowed alcove. "What the hell are you doing here, Elara?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "How did you even get past security? This isn't a freelance consultant's mixer. These are the people who run the world." Elara didn't pull her arm away. She simply looked down at his hand until he, feeling a strange chill, released her. "It's a public event, Julian. Well, public for some," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "You're pathetic," Julian spat, his face contorting with a mix of pity and rage. "Is this what it's come to? Stalking me to a Montgomery gala? I told you I'm with Sienna now. I'm in a different league. If you stay here, you're going to embarrass yourself, and frankly, I don't want the association. Leave, now, before I call security." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Marcus said, stepping out of the shadows. Julian sneered. "Sterling, I should have known you were behind this, helping your little friend play dress-up. This dress must have cost your entire year's salary, Elara. Did you put it on a credit card you can't pay off?"
Before Elara could respond, the music died down. A spotlight hit the grand staircase. Arthur Montgomery, Sienna's father, stood at the top with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice booming, "tonight is a celebration of unions, the union of my daughter to the brilliant Julian Thorne, and, more importantly, the union of our interests with the most powerful firm in the country. We are honored tonight to host the principal of the company that makes all our dreams possible." Julian straightened his tie, a smug grin spreading across his face. He leaned in close to Elara's ear. "Watch this. This is what real power looks like. Arthur is about to introduce my new partner. Maybe if you're quiet, you can stay and watch from the kitchen." Arthur Montgomery continued, "Please join me in welcoming the chairwoman of Vance Global, who has flown in specifically to oversee the finalization of the Thorne Tech acquisition, Miss Elara Vance." The room went silent. Julian's smug grin didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. Elara didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly into Julian's eyes. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached up and removed her mask. "That's my cue," she said quietly. She stepped out of the alcove and into the light. The gasp from the room was collective. Elara walked toward the stairs, her gold dress flowing like molten metal. As she passed Sienna, who stood frozen with her mouth open, Elara gave a small, polite nod. She reached the landing and took the microphone from a bewildered Arthur Montgomery. She looked down at the sea of masks, but her gaze anchored on Julian, who looked as though he were suffering a heart attack in real time. "Thank you, Arthur," Elara said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "It's true, Vance Global has taken a very close interest in Thorne Tech. In fact, we've spent the last 72 hours performing a deep dive audit of Mr. Thorne's unique management style." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. Julian took a stumbling step forward, his face drenched in sweat. "I look forward to discussing the results of that audit," Elara continued, her smile never reaching her cold, brilliant eyes. "I look forward to discussing that in the boardroom, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Don't be late, Julian. We have a lot of doors to talk about." Elara handed the microphone back and descended the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the world she had built for Julian collapsing behind her, one marble tile after another. The boardroom of Vance Global sat on the 68th floor, a cathedral of glass and brushed steel that looked out over a city that appeared like a toy set from such a height. The air was thin, cold, and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. Elara sat at the head of the mahogany table, her hands folded neatly. She wore a suit of stark, architectural white. She looked less like a woman and more like a force of nature. Marcus stood by the window, a silent sentinel, watching the elevator banks. When the doors slid open, Julian Thorne didn't walk in, he stumbled. He looked as though he hadn't slept. His tie was crooked, his hair, usually lacquered into perfection, was dry and frizzy. He looked at the room, at the 10 silent board members, and finally at Elara. "Elara," he croaked, moving toward her. "The gala, that was a hell of a stunt. Truly, you caught me off guard. But we're adults, we're partners. We can move past the theatrics." Elara didn't move. She didn't smile. "Sit down, Julian. You're polluting the air." Julian winced, but sat. He tried to summon the old charm, the lopsided grin that used to make her heart skip. "Look, I get it. You were hurt. You wanted to show me you weren't just a consultant. Message received. Your advance. It's incredible. Think of what we can do now. Thorne Tech backed by Vance Global? We'd be unstoppable. We're the ultimate power couple."
There is no we, Julian, Elara said, her voice a calm, steady blade. There is only an audit. Marcus, if you please. Marcus stepped forward and dropped a heavy leather binder in front of Julian. The sound was like a gavel. Section 4, page 12, Intellectual Property. You filed 3 patents last month for a modular AI framework. You claimed them as your sole invention. Julian shrugged, his eyes darting. I'm the CEO. It's my company. Except those designs were pulled from a private server owned by Elara Vance, time-stamped 2 years ago. While you were coding in the garage, she was building the architecture you've been selling as your own. You didn't just use her ideas, Julian. You committed corporate espionage against the woman you were supposed to marry. Julian's face turned a mottled purple. She gave them to me. It was a gift. A gift requires a transfer of rights, Elara interjected. I never signed one. And then there's the ethics clause in your Series B funding, the funding I provided. It states that any misappropriation of funds or fraudulent representation of IP results in an immediate clawback of all capital. Julian's breath hitched. You can't. That would bankrupt the company. Thousands of people would lose their jobs. Which is why, Elara said, leaning forward, I'm removing the rot at the top. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a resignation letter. Option 1, you sign this. You surrender all your shares to the employee stock pool. You walk out of this building with your name, your clothes, and nothing else. Option 2, I hand this binder to the district attorney. You'll be tied up in litigation for a decade, and by the time I'm done, you won't even be able to get a job managing a lemonade stand. Julian looked at the board members. They were stone statues. He looked at Marcus, who was checking his watch. Finally, he looked at Elara. He saw no pity, no lingering love. He saw a woman who had finally stopped carrying him. You're a monster, he hissed, grabbing a pen. No, I'm the owner. With a trembling hand, Julian signed. He stood up, trying to regain some shred of dignity. Sienna will have her father's lawyers on you by noon. You haven't won. Actually, Marcus said, scrolling his phone, Mr. Montgomery released a statement 10 minutes ago. He has officially ended the Montgomery-Thorne merger and has called off his daughter's engagement due to unforeseen character discrepancies. It seems Sienna doesn't like being seen with a sinking ship. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked smaller than he ever had. Without the money, without the stolen brilliance, he was just a man in a rumpled suit. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, the doors closing behind him with a final, echoing thud. The room was silent for a long moment. The employees will be happy, Marcus said softly. They always knew you were the one doing the real work. Elara stood up and walked to the window. Below, she saw a tiny figure emerge from the lobby and stand on the sidewalk as the city rushed past him. She didn't feel the surge of spiteful joy she had expected. She just felt light. She had spent years making herself small so he could feel big. She had dimmed her own light so he could shine. No more. Marcus walked over, handing her a fresh coffee, black, the way she liked it, not the way Julian preferred. What now, chairwoman? Elara looked out at the horizon, where the glass towers of the city met the blue of the sky. She felt the weight of the Vance Empire on her shoulders, but for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. Now, Elara said, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across her face, I think I'll go build something that actually belongs to me. She looked at Marcus, then back at the world waiting for her. She didn't need anyone to open doors for her. She owned the building.